So my name's Laura. I'm in the UK. I am 33 years old, um, which I suppose is quite a valid point in the story. Um, I've got an 18-month-old called Eloise, and
Be-
I'm getting married to my partner this year. So all that a
Beautiful.
very exciting year.
Yeah.
Um, so for me, I mention my age because I feel like when I hit my 30s, that's when things started coming together. And I've
Yeah.
heard so many other people say that as well. So I guess if I was talking to my past self, I'd be like, it will come together at some point. Like
I
this
promise
will,
you, 30 is a good number.
yeah, it will all work out. But for me, I suppose I can't really remember being I've got generalized anxiety. That's my main condition, as it were, and I have had depression as well, but I think the anxiety side of things is part of who I am as a
Who you are.
person now anyway. um but I don't feel depressed anymore, so I feel like I'm post that part of my life.
I think you mentioned something about X depression. I'm not sure
Y-
if I've ever heard that, but I like
yeah,
that conversation.
yeah, it kind of is, and I feel like, I suppose it's like being an ex-smoker. You can always go back to smoking. It's not like
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
ever dissolved from your life. Um, and I suppose for me, I don't worry about being depressed again because I've got all the right things now in place to know that, okay, well, if that does happen,
Yeah.
and it's like people say, I've got asthma. So have an asthma flare up. That's normal, right? If I had a depression flare up as such,
Yeah.
I I don't think it's something to necessarily be scared of. Obviously, you don't want it to happen, but if you've got the
It's
right things that you've
yeah.
sort of put in your toolbox beforehand, then it's quite manageable. For me anyway, I suppose.
No.
Um, so so yeah, I think generalized anxiety now is probably part of who I am, and I did go through quite a big period of working out how best to manage it. So I don't remember I remember when it started, kind of, but when I was younger, I don't remember being this person where I
Yeah.
was socially anxious or, worried about everything. I genuinely think that a lot of my anxiety and depression boils down to being on the contraceptive pill. Um, so it just all lines up very nicely to when I sort of went on a particular pill. And then when I look back, I think, oh, okay, that now that all sort of adds up.
Yeah. Kind of makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, because basically, the reason I say that is because when I came off the pill to try for my daughter, then I started to feel like, oh, okay, this is kind of lifting a little bit, and I can see it sort of with clearer eyes about what that process was. Um, and then I think, again, I think the build up to this is quite important to what my story is. So over, I suppose my depression started in 2013, and then I would say 2019, 20ish is when it sort of subsided, which is also in relation to when I met my now partner. But uh,
Interesting.
yeah, a lot of my anxiety and depression sort of boiled down to self-esteem, and I'd had lots of bad
Sure. Yeah.
relationships during that time as well, which is funny because this is the time where, like, me and Lex were really close because she was sort of like guiding me through that period and trying to be
Yeah.
like a voice of reason all the time. um so long story short, I managed to reach out for some support. The NHS isn't necessarily the, the easiest road to go down when it comes to mental
Yeah.
health support. But we have an okay system where I live because I think the mental health services are split up into regions. So where I live, you can self-refer. That self-referral process takes quite a while. But it is there where you don't have to go and see a doctor. You can literally fill out a form and say, look,
I
this is
was
how
just
you
going to
go.
ask, talk about this, what that means, like self-refer, because I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case always here in the US.
No, so where I live, and again, this is it may be different in different counties in the UK,
Yeah.
but there's literally a website, it's the Norfolk and Suffolk Wellbeing, and you go onto the website and there's a self-referral form and you literally just fill out.
Fill
I
it
think
out.
it might have like kind of is it a PHQ score system for like anxiety and depression, that sort of thing. Well,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
um I'm sure you fill out something like that, and then it can be quite a long wait. I mean, the wait times here in the UK are pretty bad, you know, especially
Yeah.
when I always think, right, okay, so for to be blunt, well, you might be dead by the time you see
No,
someone, because
I
if you're
mean,
that ill, then by the time you get there,
yeah.
um,
I mean,
but
it's blunt, but I mean, it's quite honest. I don't know if I've ever like experienced what that. Well, I haven't experienced like what that system of going through that, mental health wise. But I know what that looks like just on like your physical health, from parents and what my wife does, and it's scary. I mean, how long you have to wait for
yeah,
things, and
it's the
the more
same with
specialized and not just an emergent situation. It's like, well, it doesn't
yeah.
seem like serious.
No,
So
it's the
yeah,
same with the GPs here. Like you have to, unless you ring up at 8 a.m. on the day, you can't get an appointment, but then
yeah.
you can only book appointments 6 weeks in advance. So it's like you have to predict that you're going to be
You're
ill.
gonna be, yeah. There's a chance in 6 weeks I'm not gonna feel good. I'm gonna
Yeah,
make an appointment if that's okay.
yeah. Um, so through that, so what frustrates me with that process is that I think when you're in that situation where you do need that support, I think it's really hard to go and get it, because the last
Yeah,
thing you want to do is A, admit to it, B, like take the actions to go and get it.
yeah,
But you can go and get it. And through that process, I had some CBT, I had some talking therapy, and ultimately I ended up going on to citalopram, which I would say going on to citalopram saved my life. It was like the final piece in the puzzle. I think all
yeah.
of those different therapies played their part in me becoming more well mentally, but I think the final piece of the puzzle was going on to
Was that?
citalopram, which again I would always, if my friends feel that way, I always say, that is what happened to me. That taking that
It's
tablet
not
at the
right.
end of
Yeah,
the day was the like last thing I wanted to do, perhaps, but the best thing I've ever done.
best thing.
So, right. So that's sort of the backstory of
Yeah,
fitting all the bits together. And they say in CBT, like putting together a toolbox of working
yeah.
through anxiety. And I really do feel like that is what it is. And it's nice now because I can look back as a more
And
well
go.
person and be
Yeah,
like, yeah, and I've done all those bits and now I have that toolbox.
right.
And again, that's why I say, if I were to get depression again, I'm not
And reach
necessarily
back
worried
in
about
and
it because I've
yeah,
got those things in place. I know what it feels like as well. I know if I do still get anxiety, and I can feel it when it starts to get a bit heavy,
yeah,
but I'm very much aware of that now, so I can sort of say,
yeah,
I'm what is making me feel that way? What do I need to pull back on? Normally it's
yeah.
some sort of stress.
And I think that's a good way to look at it too. I mean, I say it all the time that's why I'm not a fan of telling people that like, here's 10 ways to get rid of your depression, or here's 6 ways to manage it maybe, but it's not going to go away, because, and that's not being dark and pessimistic. That's just the fact that you have no idea what life has in store for you next. But that's what I always try and tell people, and it's beautifully worded there, that it's a toolbox you have now,
Yeah.
that yeah, it's going to happen again, but here's what worked the last time, and there's a good starting point versus have no
Yeah,
clue,
absolutely
and
nowhere.
starting from ground one. Yeah,
So then the sort of next stage, so I'm getting better. I fairly low anxiety because I'm on citalopram. And what I would say for me, my experience on citalopram is that it just levels me out. Like it takes away all the background noise in my head where gets a bit busy and starts overthinking. Citalopram generally like levels that out for
levels
me.
that out.
It doesn't have. I wouldn't say it's the perfect drug. Like I mean, I'm on quite a low dose to what I was on now, but generally I can't cry. Like even I can feel sadness, but I physically cannot cry.
Physically
Which,
cannot cry.
yeah, which is weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, so, but I can feel sad and I can feel like I want to cry. Or, I used to always cry at watching things like X Factor or Britain's Got Talent. That always used to well me up. And now I'm just like, okay,
Whatever.
yeah, that's sad. But very like mellow. Um, so I mean, my job when I was at my most ill was quite stressful. That there's a phrase where it's like you can have three things. It's like your work, your home life, and I think it's finances, something like that. And if you drop one of those, then the balance is out.
Yeah.
So my relationships weren't great with partners because they were all quite toxic relationships, and my work was very stressful. So they were like the big triggers for me.
Yeah.
And then I met Dan, and that was the relationship bit sorted. I got a new job, and that was that bit sorted, and everything was fine. And then I went through a redundancy process when I was made redundant, I was 30 weeks pregnant, which theoretically was a legal process that
It is. Yeah.
happened. Um, but I think that is what the stress of that situation is why I ended up having Eloise 10
10
weeks
weeks.
earlier. It's not, I can't ever say for a fact because there's no way of proving that.
Right.
I think the stress of the situation is probably what brought my labour
Sure.
on. So yeah, 10 weeks early, fairly normal labour, other than the fact that, well, I say normal labour. I'd done all the hypnobirthing and stuff beforehand, although I got through half of the course because obviously I had another 10
Right.
weeks
You
to
weren't ready
go.
for that. Right.
Me and Dan were talking about this the other day actually, and I was saying how like you can do the hypnobirthing, you can prepare in whatever way you want, but the reality is I don't
You're
know
not.
anyone whose birth plan has actually gone to plan, because
No.
the minute you go through those specific doors,
we've
it's
we've done it twice now, and I can tell you the first time we had a plan, the second time caused us to say, I don't care.
dead, don't
Because you
bother.
can't. You're right.
Um, so fairly normal birth for the situation. And we were really lucky with Eloise. She was born at £4 1, so fairly hefty for
For early,
30
yeah.
weeker. We did 5 weeks in NICU. So she was on breathing support. So she was on CPAP and then Vapotherm, and she had quite a long treatment for UV for her jaundice, which is all quite normal for preemie babies.
Yeah.
Um, Dan's coping mechanism of that process was to take no time off work and to pull our bathroom out. So he was like, I'm going to cause as much havoc as possible. He was still at NICU every day, but the poor bloke
Yeah.
was getting up at. So the last 2 weeks we were on the ward, we were staying at the hospital. And this is something else I find really bizarre is one of the doctors, I think he was South African, he couldn't believe that in the UK you can't stay on the NICU ward. You can't. So the only times we got to stay on the ward was they basically do it when you're about to leave. So they sort of prepare you for what life is like with a
Yeah.
baby after NICU, rather than just being like, here's this tiny baby,
Here's
off
this
you
tiny baby. Have fun.
go.
Yeah.
But prior, so we did 3 weeks of like basically being at NICU, coming home, going to sleep. I was expressing at home at night, going back.
Yeah.
But Dan was then doing that and also working,
And also
because
working.
obviously he hadn't. I think he maybe took. No, I think he took like 5 days off, if that. But because he hadn't anticipated it happening, he's self-employed and had booked work in, so he couldn't do
Yeah.
anything. Um, so he would go to work, come to the hospital, be with me and Eloise, go to bed, do the whole thing
Do the
again,
whole thing over again. Yeah.
then pulled the bathroom out at the same time. So but then
You
afterwards
know,
he was like, that was the only way I could like
yeah.
handle that situation, because it
Yeah.
was the only thing I had control of.
Yeah.
Um,
I know that feeling well.
so yeah, we did 5 weeks in NICU, and then we came home, and there's a little bit of support there for mental. I mean, it's a very traumatic experience, and no one can prepare you for that situation. You
No.
can't. I don't think you can ever prepare to be a parent, full stop. And
No,
you probably would say the same, like, we've got one daughter, but you probably can't be prepared to have a second either. Like,
no.
you sort of learn how to manage one, and then you've got another one, and everything
And then,
changes again.
and right, then there's nothing that you did with the first one that's going to be the same with the second. No,
Um,
there's nothing that prepares you really. I mean, how many books did you read? How many courses did you take? And what did you actually come out with that,
yeah.
made sense for your situation,
And, you'd exactly like you say, every child is gonna be different, so you can read all the books, but you might piece one little sentence and another little sentence to get to where you're gonna be. And
Yeah.
there's never any chapters in the book about what happens if your baby comes early or what happens if your baby needs a bit of extra support. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm quite keen to, at some point, look into a little bit more in terms of, like, why don't we talk about it, and
Yeah.
how can we talk about it? Because I feel like parents should be prepared for that situation. I think maybe because it's so taboo, for your it's almost like people don't wanna wish it, so they don't
Yeah.
wanna read it
We don't
because
want
they
to
don't
talk about
want
it, right?
it to happen.
Yeah.
But then when it does happen, you need to sort of know, okay, well, these are the sort of things to anticipate. This is what the
Yeah.
journey might look like. I mean, obviously, everyone's journey is very different.
And you don't want to
Um,
believe that that's going to happen to you, even if there was something, you also have to prepare somebody that, look, this is a possibility. Yes, this is considered full term, but it's
yeah,
still a situation that's, not the most ideal, that we have to have a little, like you said, extra support for.
yeah, a little bit of
So what
contingency.
happened? What triggered then, when you knew that Eloise was coming 10 weeks early? What kind of triggered automatically, can you recall, in your head, that was like, oh, not even
Um,
just,
do you
making
know
sure you
what?
have X, Y, and Z prepared, but what kind of parenting triggers do you feel like went on?
I was so calm, but I think I'd literally gone into like fight or flight, and I just had like there was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
I did also have an epidural, so that did help a lot. I was again talking to Dan about this the other day because we're talking about whether we would like to have another child or not. And he'd said, because one of the things I had to deal with after Eloise was there's a feeling of loss in that you didn't get to have that full term pregnancy. So I basically lost the whole end of my third
Yeah.
trimester, or the whole of my third trimester. And especially when you're going into hospital and seeing other pregnant women, I used to look around and think, like, why didn't I get to finish? Why I
Why did I
didn't
get
do the
that?
full thing. So Dan
Yeah.
had said, I'd quite like for us to have another baby. One of the reasons being, I want you to experience having that sort of normal pregnancy, but
Yeah.
God knows if it would, ever happen.
Yeah.
What like we said, what is normal?
Right.
Um, and funnily enough, because so this was also during COVID, pretty much. I think we were kind of on the back end of COVID, but
Yeah.
still very much like in masks with the hospital. If you went into labour, you had to be triaged first. So when I my waters broke, we went to hospital, and they wouldn't let Dan in with me initially because they had to check
Yeah.
that I was in labour before he could come in. Um,
Hmm.
so it's basically because of that, I'd been working from home, and every now and then I'd put a little bit into my bag to take, and
Yeah.
luckily I'd had a bag packed for
Packed.
even
Yeah.
though yeah, even though I was like still 30 weeks, my bag was pretty much packed. Most of it was irrelevant because we had like baby grows, couldn't wear them, nappies,
Can
couldn't wear them. Like most of it was like we get to hospital, I'm like, great, well
Well,
none of that's gonna help.
that worked. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. And that, but I just remember being really not worried. And I think you just go into, right, we're doing this now then. So I'm having a baby now. Um yeah, so and I often say to Dan, like, were you worried at the time? Like we do still go through it, like sort of talk through it a bit. And think, I think he was more worried about me, like what I was going through. I think he
Sure.
was quite confident that Eloise was okay because I suppose he had a bit more awareness of what was happening in the room and what the doctors were saying and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, he's kind of on the, not necessarily on the outside, but,
Yeah,
like, not like right in the center of attention like you are as the mother, you
Yeah, I think
know,
he
and
probably had like a bigger picture than I did, where obviously with
sure,
women you're just focusing on getting the job done at the time.
right,
Um, but I think we did struggle initially, you know, those first couple of, well, I think the entire time in NICU, and we have to, so long story short is that when you, at, again, in our community or in our hospital, there is a I think he was a psychologist on the ward that you would see, like, I
that's
think we literally
unique.
saw him, I don't even know if we saw him once on the ward, but we had like some follow-up appointments with him afterwards.
Yeah,
And so we did talk about this, but one of the things for me and Dan was he didn't show any fear, any worry, and he wasn't scared, he wasn't upset. And I remember saying to him, like, why aren't you like upset about this? Why aren't you worried? And of, you know, when we started then talking through it, it was that's all he felt like he could do. He was like, I am the dad in this situation.
yeah,
I feel like I need to prop you up and be the strong person. But
yeah.
there were times where, like, I think it was the first night he left me at the hospital, and he said he was crying when he walked to the car because he just felt
Right.
so helpless.
That's when it hits you. Yeah,
Yeah, because he just couldn't, and it was completely out of his hands. He couldn't do anything.
yeah,
Um, so it's interesting when you sort of look back on those situations and think, oh, right, you were playing your role and I was playing my role. And
yeah.
that's sort of how we survived it.
How you
I
meshed,
remember
yeah.
saying to my mum as well that when it had just happened, like, do you think I mean, me and Dan have always been a very strong couple. We don't really argue. We're very much on the same wavelength. And I said to Mum, "Do you think me and Dan are going to get through this?" And there was no reason for me to say it other than, like, I can't see how anyone would come out of this like
Okay,
alive, yeah, or
yeah,
okay. Um, but we did, and probably going through that, as you know, no one will ever experience what we've experienced because it's so individual to everyone. You know,
yeah.
every birth is going to be different to everyone.
Sure, yeah.
Um, and no one will ever experience the exact same situation that we experienced. And I think for us, we know that that will always be something that we have together where, you know, again, I suppose it's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and it didn't kill us. So
It didn't kill you.
it's brought
Yeah.
us closer together. And I do think there's, so, so yeah, we went through some, I think it was more psychology than, it was talking therapy.
Yeah.
Um, which was helpful and I think made us very much looked at our relationship and, for example, how Dan was coping and how he's quite bad for like opening up, and he'll like bundle things up and then they'll come out and I'll be like, well, I
Yeah.
knew that 4 weeks ago, but because you didn't say anything, I'm just sat here like guessing what the problem is. So that process kind of helped with that. And then I self-referred again at that point, and luckily, when you're postnatal, is that the right term? You
Post
sort of fast track,
postpartum. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, yeah.
you're fast tracked if you've got any mental health problems.
Sure. Right.
So I'd maybe I hadn't self-referred, maybe this was through the health visitor, but again had some talking therapy. Um, I think do you know what? I really can't even remember. And it couldn't have been that long ago because Eloise is only 18 months old. So it's funny how much my brain's probably like, yep, you've dealt with that, you've done that, let's
And we're
move
done.
on. Um, but I think a lot of that looked at, I suppose, things like grief, because when you go through that sort of experience, there is a lot of grief there of, like I
It's a
said
version
earlier,
of it. Sure. Absolutely.
like I've lost my, you haven't lost your pregnancy as such, obviously. I've, you know, and it's a tricky one because people will say, but she's healthy and you came home with a baby and could have gone a lot worse, and it could have done,
Yeah.
but
It
it doesn't
could.
take away the experience that you've had,
Yeah.
does it?
There's a
Um,
connection there, and grief is a loss of a connection, and you know, you felt like you I don't want to say like you didn't do your job entirely as a mom
That's
anymore, but you felt
exactly
like
how
there was still
I feel.
something else you were supposed to do, you know? I mean,
Yeah,
especially if you're reading all the things that happen, day to day, week to week, month to month when you're pregnant. It's like, oh gosh, like what if she doesn't have this? Or what if she wasn't in there, I mean, so I absolutely am with you on that one.
I know it does feel like, and I've heard a lot of other mums to preemie say the same thing, where it does feel like you've not done your job. And
Yeah.
that's something that you have to talk through as well, where it's like, it's, you literally had, you've done, like you say, you've ticked all the boxes. You're not drinking, you're not smoking, you're not having caffeine, you're not, you're going for walks, you're doing everything you're meant to do. And for whatever reason,
Yeah.
it happened.
Yeah.
But you do feel like, as the mum, and there is that responsibility of, okay, well, if there's lots of things that come with being premature that Eloise still may have that we don't know about.
Yeah.
Um, where you think, what did I do to make
Yeah.
that happen? And I
Yeah.
think that's quite hard for people like Dan as well, because Dan must look at me and think, you're mad, because when you're not in the person,
Yeah.
you can look from the outside and say, I can't believe you feel like that.
Yeah.
But it is very, and the loss of the last 10 weeks, and also the loss of my maternity leave. I mean, again, at the time I was made redundant,
Sure.
so I'd lost I was paid for my maternity leave, but then I actually, when I was made redundant, was thinking, oh, okay, well, I've just got a bit of a longer maternity leave now, because
Yeah.
I've got a bit more time off
More
before
time.
Eloise comes. And then she literally came. So my contract finished on the Wednesday, and my waters broke on the Thursday.
Oh God.
So yeah, so I literally had no maternity leave.
Yeah.
And because of the situation I was in, I was going to go self-employed. So now I'm self-employed, and I had already started going through the process of setting some clients up.
Yeah.
So in my head, I knew when I was due, I was going to then let those clients know, okay, this is
This
this
is
is my
when, right.
plan. And I ended up having 2 weeks off, because I then was in a position where I couldn't afford to not work,
Right.
because I started the process of building up this
A
client.
different, yeah.
So yeah, completely lost my maternity leave. And then there's a bit of anger as well that I had to deal with anyway, because of why I felt, how it had happened. Um and I never got any answers either. So
No.
when you go into labor early, for me anyway, they checked my urine, they checked my blood, and they checked my placenta, and there was nothing in there clinically wrong with me.
Right.
And that kind of leaves it a bit open ended. Like, you'll never know why it happened. You can make
Yeah.
assumptions, but there's never that sort of close off. And if Dan and I do have another baby, there's never anything that's going to say, well, this happened last time because of this,
Right.
so
So make
it
sure.
will or won't happen again.
Yeah.
um so yeah, there was lots to talk through when I had that talking therapy. um it's interesting now that I speak about it. I think, like, is that all resolved? And I don't think it is. But I think you learn to manage it, don't you? You learn to, like,
You
it's
do.
then part of your, like you said
Yeah.
earlier, your lived experience. It just is there, something you've
Yeah. And
handled.
I think that's something that, it sounds like you're kind of aware of, at least as a parent, that you do, like, and I think they probably mentioned it, but maybe something like a brief sentence, you weren't really, you were reading the whole paragraph and you missed it, that it does just kind of kick in. The part that's, a challenge, I think, is that, you may not be aware that it kicked in, that you're ready for this. And, you're not aware what, when it does kick in, what that means for you, and I mean, as I'm listening to you talk about Dan there, that, I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax too, that everybody has their role. And, it sounds like it's defined, but not really, I mean, there's some situations, just like you were talking about, with just, being depressed and anxious. You have no idea what's going to come next. The best you can do is just say, okay, this is probably going to happen. Um, this is probably not going to be fun at some point. Um, but no, I mean, I think that's very reasonable to think like that and have those thoughts in the back of your head. it's having to, be able to talk yourself through it, or be able to reach out. And it sounds like, I'll tell you just quickly about our experience and what baffles me. And while I'm probably going to just save your information, because one day I'm going to do this all on the data end, because it's both fascinating and terrifying for me. So when our son was born, um, I don't think it's, when you said psychologist came in and talked to you, I was like, there's, that definitely didn't happen. Maybe if they saw panic in our faces, maybe, I don't know. But you have all those other specialists that check in and go, okay, I'm this and this doctor, I'm here on the floor if you need me. But it's like, you don't know what you need at that point, sure.
Absolutely.
Maybe I'll see you later. I don't know. Right. But that didn't happen. I can tell you for sure that there was not a psychologist, but there was this nice little form. And I don't think that happened with our daughter at all. Same health system. So I don't know what changed in 22 months. But I remember filling out the form for my wife, because at the moment, she was, taking care of our son, like, I think maybe just feeding him before we were about to leave the hospital a little while. But I'm able to answer most of the questions. But I think the one that stood out was asking if she felt sad, or, crying or depressed, or any and all of the above. And I mean, her quick response was like, don't say yes, because I know what that means. They're going to panic. And of course I'm sad and scared and anxious. Like, this is a new situation. But when she said it to me, I at least can go, yeah, I know she's okay. That's fine that we're not being completely honest with this form. But how many people walk away from a situation, even, and this was a, fairly normal pregnancy, and there was nothing early, nothing traumatic, nothing, anything like that. But how many people are in your situation that get something like that, or have the psychologist come and see them and they go, I guess, is this normal? No, I'm okay. And they're not. And then they just let you go, and there's nothing, no follow up, no, check in as far as like, how are you doing as a parent? And
Yeah.
it's not the sleep things, it's not the eating, it's not the rashes, it's not any of that. It's the, to me, it's the situations that pop up that make you go, ooh, I, that kind of triggered a, an anxious response or an anger or something. That, where did that come from? It's
Yeah.
that nobody's addressing. But so how do you, as a parent now, how do you see all that? And looking, you've said several times looking back, but having to
Um,
start kind of early, what does that do for your preparedness?
I mean, I don't think you can be prepared whenever you do it. But I think one of the things that was difficult, particularly, I mean, you couldn't really have a preemie baby at a worse time because we were in the middle of the pandemic. So none of our parents were able to meet Eloise
Yeah,
until she came home. And I know that's an interesting point as well. I know my family, or my mum, she was like, I don't feel like a nanny yet, because she's just this
yeah,
picture that it's not palpable.
yeah,
Um, and they kind of feel lost as well, because there's nothing anyone that can do to, you're the only ones, being down, we're the only ones that could go to hospital. I mean, we were lucky
yeah.
in terms of possibly a few months before us, it was literally you had to book a 2 hour slot to go onto the NICU ward, or it was a
Ooh,
case of like only one of you could go at a time. You couldn't both be there because that was too many people.
yeah.
So
Oy.
we were lucky in terms of we could both be there, and we could be there 24/7 if we wanted to. Um, but there's nothing that other people can do to support you in that situation other than, I mean, there is, can I cook you some food? That was really helpful. Can I? But
Yeah.
these things are helpful whether you have an early baby or not. So people bringing you food or offering to clean or all those sorts of things are really helpful when you've got a
Those are
newborn.
right. Those are the things that really like are more supportive, right? In the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah. Rather than like, can I come around for a cup of tea? No, but you can clean my
No.
bathroom. Um, so what did we do for preparedness? I mean, I think it's still difficult when you bring a preemie home, because so we brought Eloise, she did 5 weeks on NICU. So when she came home, she was theoretically 35 weeks gestation. So she was still 5 weeks before full term when
Full
she came
term, yeah.
home, and she's this little dot, like little tiny, and I suppose there is that fear of like getting in the car for the first time, and again, I think this is all the same for most new parents. Like getting a full size baby in the car for the first time is scary. Um, but getting in the
And
car
they
for the
can't and they can't help you with that either. Like I think that was the first like moment for us that, and thank
first,
God we had like a nurse that was like, "Oh, I can't really, but I can kind of point this out." But that was it. Like that was, I think, at least for me, that's when it hit. It was like, "Oh crap! Like
like you're
you
on your
guys are
own now.
out now.
Yeah,
Like now we're
which
totally in."
honestly, I find that crazy as well. Like I'm not sure what's the better situation because we so I was actually in hospital myself, I think, for 3 days. But obviously then we were there for 5 weeks before we went home. But our system, they try and get you in and out of hospital within like 6 hours or something.
Yeah,
And for a first time mum, I don't know what's worse. I mean,
yeah,
obviously 5 weeks in hospital is worse, but in my opinion. But we the funny thing for us about NICU is we were kind of taught how to be parents. So they showed us how to change a nappy. They showed us how
hmm,
to feed a bottle. They showed us
yeah,
how to breastfeed. Like, I mean, you do get that. I don't think they'll let you go out of hospital until your baby feeds, whether that's bottle or breast
right,
anyway. But we kind of had this education on how to parent while we were there. And although all these bad or scary things and frustrating things, and I remember saying to Dan, like, I can't imagine ever coming home. Like, I just feel like this is life now because I
yeah,
suppose you're so in the moment, you can't see past you're surviving at that point.
yeah,
But we were getting this like education. I could change a nappy through a incubator with my eyes closed by the end of it. Like trying to change a nappy standing up now is not an
it's
issue
like
for me because I've had to do like back front upside down. So if on the other hand we'd have had this normal experience and gone home on the day, there's part of me that thinks, well, that's terrifying as well because like I don't know how to change a nappy. I've never done it
yeah,
before, especially when you're having that pregnancy through COVID because you don't have those face to face lessons where they might get a doll out or
yeah,
whatever, they do. We had everything online and, it's like
yep.
watching balloons being blown up to show you what a cervix was like and all that sort of thing. But you didn't get any like hands on experience and you couldn't even go and visit other babies because, again,
Yeah,
we were in COVID. So, yeah, in one respect, it it was not a good experience, but it had its positives because, yeah, we had this education that
yeah.
we needed.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's the same either way. I mean, like I said, I mean, it was a full term for both of them for the most part. Daughter just a slight bit earlier, but still, I mean, it's exact. I mean, it sounds like mirrored. I want to say that they give you. I want to say it's a day that you can stay here, like so whenever that is, whenever the clock started. But again, I mean, still want you, which I get, right? It's like this hard balance. It's like you understand, like the hospital's the worst place to be altogether because you're around other sick people, and especially with like a small one. So you get that, but then it's like, you wait. This is a big situation. You want me to do
Yeah,
what when I get home? Um, but then on the other side, I also understand that, right? That you can have somebody do it all the time because you are, but
a
so it's
job
it's a
now.
weird. I mean, I'm with you. Like, it's a hard balance, and they don't tell you you could practice on a little. And if you had a chance to practice with a little, a doll to do it, that one's not moving. That
No,
one's not screaming. That one's not making it. Adding other factors in there.
yeah,
So I think there's things that they're not going to prepare you for, but there's certainly not a mental health aspect to it that's really going to help you pay attention to what, not even even not even like a how to, but like a, hey, by the way, that kid's probably going to scream at the most inopportune time, and it might cause you to be anxious and elicit response. Just an
yeah.
FYI, there's not even a that. um
Um,
so go ahead.
what was I going to say about mental health on release from hospital? Um, Oh yeah, so I was reading. There's some good Instagram accounts. I'll have to forward them to you for premature babies, and there's a lot around PTSD and how often for don't quote me on these numbers, but often for parents to premature babies, the PTSD doesn't kick in until, for example, 9 months after your baby's born. So often by that point, all of the sort of reach out has stopped.
Yeah,
Like you say, you might get the initial, well, are you okay? Well, at that point, you're still, like I said earlier, you're just surviving. Like,
yeah,
I mean, during our NICU stay, for the most part, yeah, I was okay because you're just so tunnel
yeah,
visioned on
yeah,
Eloise surviving and you surviving and not keeling over because you're so tired and stressed that like you don't really care. I mean, especially this is another thing, and this is from a physical perspective. I had to have surgery after Eloise because my placenta didn't detach, and I'd also had I was cut. So but because your baby's then taken away from you onto another ward, you literally don't get, I mean, you do get recovery time and you're not
yeah,
told, right, well, you have to get up and go and see your baby. You're not told that. And I think in one respect, the nurses would rather you stayed in bed as long as possible because you've obviously just gone through quite a traumatic
yeah,
experience. But I remember just this, I had to go and see her. Obviously, I had to go and see her. But then you get no recovery time because you're then
yeah,
having to look after this premature baby. And I suppose the same with any other, if you've had a cesarean, there's no recovery time really
no,
because who else is, obviously you've got hopefully a partner there or
yeah.
a family
But your
member.
mom,
Yeah.
you know,
And there will be that instinct always to, right, I need to get up, I need to go and do this.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, going back to premature parents, often that PTSD doesn't kick in until a lot
yeah,
longer down the line because you are just surviving and you are, there is that flight or fight mode where you're just having to get on with it, but the outreach stops after
and it stops pretty
however
quick.
many
Yeah,
weeks, at which point you are, you like you say, and there is a big thing around, I don't want to say that I'm anxious or
sure,
worried, or and my anxiety definitely sprung up after I had Eloise, and that's just a hormonal thing. But well, I think anyway. But I'm lucky enough that I know, okay, well, I can put my medication up a little bit and that will level it out. And that's what I did. I tried to bring my medication down at one point and I was worried that I was gonna, I think I'd said to Dan, like, I'm worried that I'm gonna just push you in front of a car, like for no reason. There was no part of me that wanted to do that. But what if I
but
did?
yeah,
What if I just pushed him in front of a car? And when things like that start going off in my head, that's when I'm like, right, you need to put your medication up because that's so irrational and there's nothing driving that thought whatsoever.
yeah,
Um, but that's where I'm lucky that I now can identify that and
yeah.
know,
I was just gonna say you have some sign of awareness at least, and
yeah,
that's unique, really.
that's totally off balance.
Yeah,
Here's what you need to do to re-stabilize that.
yeah,
Um, and luckily Dan's just like, okay, all right, you're all right. That's not completely irrational. Um, so yeah, so I think there was a period after I'd had Eloise where hormonally that wasn't right, and I just knew, okay, well, I need to put my medication up, and I've got a really good doctor now. Well, not that I ever see the same doctor, but the doctor I seem to see quite regularly said, you can bring your medication down if you want to, but I want you to do it every summer. So I want you to come down 10 milligrams
oh,
in the
interesting.
summer and then another
Yeah,
10 milligrams the next summer rather than just,
all at once.
or
Yeah,
yeah, all at once or through the year. And then you're doing it in December when it's horrible and you're going to more likely be a bit depressed anyway.
yeah,
So I think that's important as well, is that now we're having this sort of new generation of doctors and nurses come through that actually have a more modern approach to
yeah.
mental health
And
and
think about that part as well as whatever they're been trained on and went to school for.
yeah.
So just to like tie it all in a nice little bow, then what would you say to somebody, having your same lived experience, or going through it, has gone through it? What was the thing that really kind of let you breathe each day, or is, even to this day, getting you through?
From my experience as a parent to a premature baby, they are hard as nails. They are the hardest little people going. So I guess the one thing, I've had friends that have not had similar experiences, but have also had to go through NICU after me, and luckily as well. So I've had a couple of people that I know that went through it before me, and I was able to reach out, and there is this sort of unspoken bond of NICU parents where it's like you find out that they'd also done it, and then you're like sort of taken under the wing of
Yeah.
this NICU parenthood. But you will get through it. That is all I can say, is that it will feel, during going through it, it will feel like you'll never see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you will. And whatever outcome that is, it might not be the best outcome, but you will get through that. I just think people that go through those sorts of experience just generally come out much harder than they went into it.
Yeah.
And certainly for the babies, like, I know a few preemie babies and they're all absolute hard nuts.